repository. Please keep in mind that you will need to refresh the repository page as it does not automatically update. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses. This makes it easier for me to make sure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Additionally, before we begin, I would also like to ask unanimous consent for our colleague, Representative Pappas, to participate in today's hearing, should he be able to attend without objection, so ordered. Does any member have any questions about the conduct of this hearing with members participating remotely? Hearing none, we will proceed. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. We're so glad that Chair Pappas could join us today for today's hearing, as he was one of the original requesters of the investigation we will be discussing today. It takes real courage to come forward to speak about military sexual trauma, or MST, how it has impacted your life. For many, the process of filing a claim for conditions related to MST leads to further emotional distress, so we are grateful for everyone who is participating today. It is essential that the Department of Veterans Affairs does everything they can to support these men and women during this process. We are alarmed by the VA OIG report that came out this summer. When the VA switched to centralized processing in an effort to reduce the backlog, one of the unfortunate decisions made by the VA was the elimination of the specialized lanes that had been created for complex cases such as MST. While reducing the backlog is of utmost importance, it should not take precedence over policies and procedures for processing claims which impact the quality of the decision. With all of the changes that have been made, one of the most important roles is the oversight of training, as the OIG report made painfully clear could use improvement. While we are glad to see a recognition of the need for specialization of cases like this, we are concerned the rapid shift to 5 regional offices specializing in MST, soon to be 1 regional office, will result in confusion among employees, lack of governance of training requirements, and potential burnout of employees due to sensitive nature of the material they are asked to review, as well as a lack of weight on cases that may take a longer time to review. We also want to make sure that these shifts, training to the 56 pairs of regional office VBA MST coordinators, is still being conducted. It is my hope that the VA will assure our subcommittees of the protections and policies they've put into place to ensure the incorrect processing rate of denials is declining rather than increasing. Additionally, with the more recent expansion of services for MST survivors, there is more education and coordination the VA could be doing to connect veterans who are filing MST claims with the services that they qualify for. The claims process is one of the first touch points many veterans have with the VA. This is a great opportunity to connect veterans with available services. This is one of the impetuses for this joint subcommittee hearing, to learn more about how VHA and VBA can collaborate to provide better access to benefits and services for MST survivors. On that note, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Nels for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Lurie, and everyone in the room that's here, the witnesses, the panel. I want to thank you for being here as well. And what we do know is in the fiscal year 2021, the VA processed over 25,000 claims related to military sexual trauma. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage for survivors of military sexual trauma to come forward and submit a claim for compensation. And it's important that the VA gets the decision right the first time, that they get the decision right the first time. Some veterans may feel discouraged if VA does not properly decide the claim. In other instances, the VA may not be able to grant the claim because of the evidence of record. Those veterans may be disheartened if VA letters are not sensitive to their experience. If MST survivors have a negative experience with VA, they may never ever walk through the VA doors again. And this may prevent them from accessing the care and benefits they need and focus on healing. And I'm deeply concerned that last August, the Office of Inspector General, or the IG, reported that an estimate 620 of the 1,100 claims, or 57%, of denied PTSD claims based on MST were incorrectly processed. If this sounds like deja vu, you're not alone. In August of 18, the IG determined that almost 50% of denied PTSD claims related to MST had claims processing errors. Although all of these cases may not have been improperly denied, VA was not handling MST claims, related claims, as carefully as it should be. These errors were a result of inadequate training, guidance, and quality controls. And during a hearing this subcommittee held in June of 2019, VA testified that it was implementing all of the IG's recommendations. However, 3 years after the first report, the IG found that the VA did not successfully execute them. IG attributed this failure to a lack of effective oversight of MST-related claims. And quite honestly, it's unacceptable. Our veterans deserve better. The VA must develop an effective plan to address IG's concerns and ensure this does not happen again. I've also heard concerns regarding the disability exam process for MST-based claims. And for an example, some VSOs believe the rating schedule and disability benefits questionnaire are outdated for conditions linked to MST. Some veterans question why certain conditions only include a physical exam, even if the condition have psychological causes. Moreover, a March 2021 GAO report found that MST-related claims were twice as likely to be returned for correction than other exam types. And for these reasons, I am introducing a bill that would require VA to partner with the National Academies to complete a comprehensive review of the MST disability claim process. The National Academies would determine whether VA's diagnostic criteria meets current medical standards, examiners who conduct MST exams have the appropriate credentials and training, and disability exams account for conditions that have both physical and psychological causes, and alternative options for conducting more intimate physical exams exist if veterans do not feel comfortable or cannot complete such exams. The bill would also require the VA to report on any actions it plans to take to improve the MST disability exam process following the National Academy study. And lastly, I'm interested in discussing the coordination between the VBA and the VHA to care for these veterans. Veterans filing claim for MST may want additional emotional support throughout the process, understandably so. And the VHA provides excellent health care that assists many MST survivors on the path to healing. I would like to hear the witnesses' ideas for how VBA can better connect these veterans to mental health services through VHA and community partners such as the VSOs. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Nels, and thank you for your work and your attention to this important topic. And I would now like to recognize Chairwoman Brownlee of the Health Subcommittee for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to just take a moment to recognize that we are holding this joint hearing titled Supporting Survivors to do just that, support survivors, men and women who served our country honorably and bravely. It's important to acknowledge that some of the topics surrounding military sexual trauma that we will discuss today are difficult and may be triggering for some. But let us also recognize the incredible strength of our nation's MST survivors. These difficult conversations are necessary in order to address programmatic weaknesses that must be resolved to improve our services to MST survivors. Our veterans fought for our country when they raised their right hand, and sadly for their lives when they were subjected to sexual trauma, a trauma that they did not sign up for, a trauma that they should never have experienced, to experience a blind eye and betrayal by our own United States military. Today, we will hear from both the Veterans Benefits Administration and the Veterans Health Administration, two organizations that play critical roles in ensuring MST survivors are heard, are made aware of the resources available to them, and to receive the treatment that they deserve. While each plays a separate role in this process, one administering claims and the other in the administration of healthcare, these two organizations must effectively communicate and work together seamlessly to provide the very best support of our veterans, both men and women, but in the majority of cases, our women veterans. Just 3 months ago, VA's Office of Inspector General published a report that revealed, among many, that 57% of military sexual trauma claims VBA processed and denied during the first quarter of fiscal year 2020 had not been processed correctly. This was an 8% jump from the 49% error rate OIG detected in its 2018 review of the denied MST claims. VA OIG also identified wide variations in the timing, training, and resources available to VBA's MST outreach coordinators, who serve as designated and critical points of contact for veterans with MST claims. In response to a request from Mr. Pappas and myself, the OIG issued a second report in August of 2021 about VHA's role in caring for MST survivors. In the report, OIG surveyed VHA's MST coordinators who are responsible for providing support and outreach to veterans who have experienced MST and assisting in educating facility level staff about screening and treatment for MST survivors. OIG found that 39% of VHA's MST coordinators reported that they did not have adequate resources to fulfill their responsibilities. Specifically, they lacked protected administrative time and support staff and reported inadequate funding for outreach materials, education efforts, and special projects. In addition to these concerning findings from the VA OIG, I expect that today's hearing will also examine the lack of communication needed between VBA and VHA to better serve our veterans and to ensure that MST survivors don't have to power through the traumatization of telling their stories over and over again. We need to see more warm handoffs between two administrations, particularly when VHA providers encounter veterans who've experienced MST. They can help refer these veterans to VBA to file claims, and vice versa. When VBA begins the processing of disability ratings to veterans that have experienced MST, they can inform them that they can access and how to access VHA treatment immediately. While both organizations have taken steps to improve their respective services for MST survivors, the two August 2021 OIG reports clearly show that there is plenty of room for improvement, and it is our duty in Congress to ensure that our veterans who are MST survivors can get the quality care and services they deserve. With that, thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee, and really pleased that we're able to bring our two subcommittees together today to have this important hearing. And I will now recognize Representative Miller Meeks, who will be standing in as the ranking member for the Health Subcommittee until General Bergman is able to join us. So Representative Miller Meeks, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Laureate. General Bergman, the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee, had another commitment this morning and will be joining shortly. As a 24-year military veteran and as a physician, I'm humbled to open this hearing on his behalf. There have been multiple opening statements made already this morning, so I will try to keep mine brief. I associate myself with the comments made by my colleagues about the scourge that is military sexual trauma. For one service member to inflict such suffering on another is antithetical to the oath that every service member takes. It is appalling, unacceptable, and cannot be tolerated. We are here to discuss what more VA can do to secure swift and effective care and benefits for veterans who have experienced MST. VA estimates that approximately 1 in 3 veteran women and 1 in 50 veteran men have experienced MST. The VA healthcare system must be equipped to provide timely, high-quality care to each of those veterans and to other MST survivors that the VA is charged with caring for, including those on active duty. MST can have a devastating impact on an individual's physical and mental health. MST can also uniquely be difficult for many survivors to seek help due to the sensitivity of the trauma itself and the stigma and shame that sadly still surrounds sexual harassment and assault. VA should be a safe and welcoming space for survivors of MST and for all veterans. But all too often, VA medical facilities are anything but safe and welcoming. VA's own research indicates that approximately 1 in 4 women veterans are the recipients of inappropriate and or unwanted comments or behavior by male veterans on VA grounds. Like MST, that is also appalling, unacceptable, and cannot be tolerated. It also underscores the need to ensure that VA has a robust community care network to shoulder the burden of care, not only in the event that the VA cannot provide an appointment within the Mission Act access standards or other eligibility criteria, but also in the event that a veteran doesn't feel safe seeking care within VA's walls. That is something I hear frequently from fellow veterans, particularly those who experienced MST, and that alone should be sufficient reason to refer an individual to the community. Providing care to a veteran in need is vastly more important than where that care occurs. I don't want any veteran to decide not to seek care at all because they don't feel safe at the VA. And I hope to discuss that more this morning. Finally, I want to note how much I appreciate the joint focus of this hearing and the opportunity to discuss this important topic with not just the Subcommittee on Health, but also with our colleagues on the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs. Military service doesn't occur in a stovepipe, and neither should the system of care and benefits that greet service members when they leave the military and become veterans. Care and compensation should work hand in hand if our true goal is to help veterans get well. That requires the Veterans Health Administration and the Veterans Benefit Administration to work hand in hand as well, which we know is far from the current reality. We must fix that, and to that end, I hope today's joint hearing is the first of many to come. I am grateful to our witnesses for being here, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. We will now move to our panels. We have two panels for today's hearing. On the first panel, we have Ms. Beth Murphy, Executive Director of Compensation Services at the Veterans Benefits Administration, who will deliver the agency's testimony, and thanks for joining us again before our committee. She's also accompanied by Ms. Cheryl Rawls, Executive Director of Outreach, Transition, and Economic Development at the Veterans Benefits Administration. And thank you, Ms. Rawls, for being here today. They're also joined by Dr. Marsden McGuire, Director of the Continuum of Care and General Health and Suicide Prevention at the Veterans Health Administration. Also here today is the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General, Michael Missel. I will start with Ms. Murphy and recognize you for 5 minutes for a statement.
Good morning, Chair Loria and Chair Brownlee, also Ranking Member Nels and Bergman. Thank you for introducing us, and we appreciate the invitation to speak today on the important topic of VA support for survivors of military sexual trauma. VA is committed to supporting veterans suffering from chronic mental health conditions and other disabilities due to MST, and to helping these survivors get healthcare services and benefits for their MST-related mental and physical health disabilities. In efforts to continuously improve service to veterans, VBA made several changes recently to improve MST-related claims are processed and decided correctly. These include revising internal procedural guidance and training, consolidating MST claims to specially trained processors, and expanding outreach. And VBA has established an Office of Review, Compliance, and Accountability via a working group focused on comprehensive assessments of VBA processes and improvements, and targeting consistency in claims processing and, importantly, sustainability of corrective actions. VBA has enhanced its training materials for MST-related processing. MST processors are required to complete an expanded foundational course on claims development and rating procedures and annual refresher training. In fiscal years 20 and 21, VBA also conducted national training symposiums for a broad number of MST outreach coordinators and processors with assistance from VHA. I do want to point out that VHA mental health and primary care providers are also required to complete mandatory training on MST that prepares them to furnish trauma-sensitive services. Not only that, but VA also requires certification training for all clinicians, both in VHA and under VBA contract, who conduct disability exams for MST-related issues. As a result of the changes VBA has made over the last several years, claims data reflects a steady and dramatic increase in the percentage of MST-related claims that have been granted. In fiscal year 2018, it was 57%. And in FY21, on more than 23,000 completed MST claims, it was 74%. VA is delivering benefits and healthcare services to MST survivors, and I encourage those who may be impacted to file a claim or seek assistance, which is why VA's outreach efforts are important, especially to individuals affected by MST. VA conducts recurring targeted outreach with briefings to inform, educate, and empower individuals to access VA benefits, healthcare, and resources. This includes during transition assistance program briefings for transitioning service members. Every VBA regional office has MST coordinators, male and female, specially trained to assist veteran survivors with the claims process and to collaborate with VHA and other stakeholders. Every VHA healthcare system has a VHA MST coordinator as well. VHA promotes engagement into care and works to increase awareness of MST-related services. VHA has a range of initiatives to ensure both clinical and frontline staff are prepared to assist survivors. For example, the Military Sexual Trauma Consultation Program is available to any VHA staff member or provider who has questions. VHA and VBA coordinators collaborate routinely with a focus on bidirectional, warm handoffs to assist those who have experienced MST. In conclusion, it is critical for VA to ensure compassionate and sensitive interactions with MST survivors, and it is a top priority to provide those eligible with necessary MST-related benefits and services. To that end, VA staff have the knowledge, skills, and resources they need to provide streamlined access to specialized veteran-centric care. There is strong commitment across VA to sustain and continue to enhance MST-related support and outreach. This concludes my testimony. My colleagues and I would be happy to address questions from members of the subcommittees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I will now recognize Mr. Missel for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairs Luria and Brownlee, Ranking Member Nels and Bergman, and members of the subcommittees. Thank you for holding this hearing and for the opportunity to discuss the OIG's benefits and healthcare oversight work related to military sexual trauma. As we come together today, our thoughts are with all of those veterans who suffered sexual assaults or harassment during their military service. We also think of their loved ones who have seen the effects firsthand. VA has been working to improve the processes for disability compensation benefits and the delivery of healthcare treatment for those who have experienced MST. Although well-intentioned, VA's efforts for improvement are not complete. VA can and must do better. Because MST can affect veterans' mental and physical health, work, relationships, and other aspects of their everyday life, it is imperative that VA provide veterans who have suffered MST with the full benefits and services they are due. They must do so effectively, timely, and with compassion. Failure to meet these objectives can further traumatize vulnerable veterans and cause disengagement and serious harm. The OIG has published 5 MST-related oversight reports since 2010, both benefits audits and healthcare inspections. Each of these reports identified deficiencies and had recommendations for corrective actions that would help VA improve its responses. 2 themes emerged from these past efforts. First, benefits claim processing often ignores some of the very procedures that VA has set up for quality assurance. Proper processing is critical as it drives accuracy. Second, failures in governance have contributed to VA not fully implementing recommendations and healthcare program support that would improve outcomes for veterans seeking care or benefits for MST. To provide specifics about my office's concerns, I would like to highlight the findings from 3 of our more recent reports. In 2018, we published a benefits audit that found about half of denied MST-related claims were not processed consistent with VBA policy. VBA concurred at that time with all 6 OIG recommendations. Given the gravity of this issue and concerns we had while assessing VA's efforts to close these recommendations, we conducted a follow-up audit to determine whether VA's performance had improved. On August 5th, 2021, we published the finding of that audit, and unfortunately, there was not an improvement in processing properly denied MST-related claims. As a result, VBA lacks assurance that qualified veterans are in fact receiving the benefits for which they qualify. This occurred primarily due to governance, communications, and oversight failures among various offices within VBA that had a role in implementing our prior audit's recommendations. Following a request from Chairwoman Brownlee and Chairman Pappas, the OIG conducted a healthcare inspection of select activities and challenges of VHA's MST coordinators that resulted in the 3rd most recent OIG report. The OIG generally found that MST coordinators had a sincere commitment to the role, were thoughtful about the challenges, and were enthusiastic about serving in the position. However, they often lacked the support and resources needed to be successful. Many of the MST coordinators interviewed said they did not have enough time to fulfill all of the responsibilities of their role. A number of them said that other clinical duties interfered with the time needed to complete their MST-related responsibilities. Moreover, some of the MST coordinators said that they did not have adequate resources to fulfill their MST administrative-related responsibilities. These included lack of funding and program materials for outreach, education, and special projects. It is critical that VA ensures that veterans who experience MST receive the full benefits and healthcare services that they are due. The OIG will continue to follow VA's progress to implement both the letter and spirit of the outstanding recommendations and will conduct additional work as necessary. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Missel. We'll now move to questioning, and I'll first recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I'll start with Ms. Murphy. I noted in the VA's written testimony that you mentioned ORCA, the Office of Review of Compliance and Accountability. Can you tell me when you expect this office to be set up and running, who and what offices will be involved, and how they'll be holding people accountable who do not follow procedures?
ORCA is a new endeavor for us in VBA. What we had seen in the past is what has been mentioned. Multiple offices having responsibilities and input and roles, but then some miscommunication, lack of synergy in actual execution. So what Mr. Clark, our Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations, and we are the executive champions in standing up ORCA. It's a different direction than we've had before. At this point, we anticipate that ORCA will be up underneath Mr. Clark in Field Operations as really a compliance and accountability arm to work with the field. It's still a work in progress. Maybe later this fiscal year, early next fiscal year, but there has been a working group with detailed employees, including an SCS senior executive overseeing it for several months now.
Thank you. And my staff was recently briefed on a joint executive council oversight of VHA and VBA efforts to address sexual harassment and sexual assault. How does this differ or interface with ORCA, as well as the ad hoc working group mentioned in the response letter to the letter that I sent in March? So it seems like you have several groups working in parallel. How do they all fit together, and where do their different authorities lie?
I would say that it's a demonstration of VA's broad commitment at many levels to help and assist MST survivors. So ORCA is within VBA and it's with field operations. So it is primarily focused on claims processing, implementing improved processes, following up and checking, working with the regional offices, but it's across all types of claims. MST has been its first focus, but it will be implementing process improvement and accountability broadly across claims processing. Whereas the Joint Executive Committee, which is co-chaired by the Deputy Secretary and a counterpart on DoD, this is a bigger picture VA effort that spans across MST-related services.
So that broader effort, is it just VBA or VBA and VHA?
It's at
together?
the VA level. So VBA, VHA working with Department of Defense.
So do you have a plan or a roadmap of or goals that have been established by this working group so that we can try to understand, from where you are, where you're trying to go? Because one of the things we've heard the most, I think, and several of my colleagues referenced this in their remarks, is that, and especially Ms. Brownlee, that perhaps there's not enough coordination across VBA and VHA back and forth. Is that one of the focuses of this group?
As far as the Joint Executive Committee subcouncil, that falls up under, we call the JEC, the Joint Executive Committee. They have milestones. There are quarterly meetings between the DoD and the VA co-chairs. So yes, they have a charter. They have deliverables. I believe at this point they are primarily focused on implementation of Deborah Sampson Act elements.
Okay, thank you. Would love the opportunity at a future date to discuss more their work and their goals and accomplishments. In the time remaining, I just wanted to touch again on 2 days ago, our subcommittee was provided with a document called Military Sexual Trauma Path Forward. Is that related to these other organizations within the VA that you discussed, and who will be the governing body to ensure the recommendations in this are implemented and followed? And there's also a mention of a journey map in progress being created within this. When can we expect to see that?
That work group was requested by our secretary, Secretary McDonough. And again, it is a broad view across all administrations, not just VBA or VHA, not just focus on claims processing, for example. There were a number of recommendations from the working group that has just been published and approved. And it does include a governance structure. I think that is to be determined. The implementation team will work through that execution. The journey map is something that we've had success with in other venues, working with our Veterans Experience Office at the department. Journey map really looks at the process, not from like the bureaucratic side of the government, but from the perspective of the individual.
Well, thank you. Just in summary, it seems like there's no shortage of efforts. One of my concerns is that all of these are synchronized, they're not duplicating efforts, and that ultimately the goal is to best serve the veteran. So would look forward to some continuing updates on how these groups are working together and what they're accomplishing. And since I went over, recognize my ranking member Nels for 6 minutes.
Very well. First question is the Inspector General Musil. If you were to give the VA a grade, the A, B, C, D, F, on whether the VBA is following its process regarding MST related claims, what would it be? What would be the grade? And then why?
It's really hard to give them a grade because all we looked at were the denied claims. We didn't look at everything, and we focused in on the process. But I would say whatever grade, it would not be a great grade because we found so many issues. And what was particularly disturbing is we had our 2018 audit in which we identified a variety of processing issues. We detailed them for VBA in the report. We put together recommendations that we believed were going to address them. And then when we were in the process of assessing their response to the recommendations, we had concerns that they weren't doing them correctly. And that's what caused us to do the second review, second audit of VBA processing. And in that second audit, we found that they failed in properly implementing each of the 6 recommendations.
Thank you. And Ms. Murphy, according to that August 2021 OIG report, VA agreed. The VA agreed to provide a comprehensive plan for implementing both the 2018 and the 2021 report recommendations by August 31st of 2021, a few months back. The OIG reports that it has not received VA's plan. So my question is when will the VA provide this information?
Thank you, sir. These are very important plans. You said earlier that we had not been handling as carefully as could be. Mr. Missel also said efforts were not complete. I think those are fair statements. We want to make sure that we get it right this time and dot all the I's, cross all the T's. I would say that we have demonstrated through our performance and the significant increase in our grant rate that we are doing the right things. We're heading in the right direction. But there have been instances where if, for example, a claims processor was supposed to upload a checklist to the veterans folder and that wasn't done, that's considered a procedural error. It doesn't mean that the claim was done incorrectly or there was a wrong outcome. But I agree, there is room for areas to improve in execution and to tighten things up.
Okay, so the real question is when will the VA provide this information?
So Mr. Clark and I have looked at the initial drafts of those written plans, and we sent our folks back to the table to flesh them out additionally. I would say early next calendar year, we would target completing those plans.
By the end of the first quarter, fair enough?
I would say early in the second quarter.
I'll hold you to that.
Thank you, sir.
I yield back now.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nels. I'll now recognize Chairwoman Brownlee for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Missel, I think we know how important seamless communication is between VHA and VBA. I think that's established that we need to go there. I think my staff has just recently heard about this VA Joint Executive Council. Ms. Murphy, you just said they're really focusing on Deborah Sampson, which I'm very happy about as the author of Deborah Sampson. On the other hand, I'm disturbed because I would hope that the primary responsibility of the VA Joint Executive Council would be to ensure getting rid of silos and getting VHA and VBA really working seamlessly together. So I guess, Mr. Missel, my question to you is, have you heard about this? Is this new information to you with regards to the VA Joint Executive Council?
This is relatively new information, and we have not had a chance to assess it or determine its potential effectiveness.
Do you think if it is really truly designed about holding the two together, working together, focusing on MST survivors, seamless communication, that's a worthy thing to put together?
Absolutely. There are a number of issues, and MST is one of them, that go across VA administrations. They could have benefits within VBA, they could get healthcare within VHA. And obviously, the more they communicate, the more they work seamlessly together, you would expect better results.
Very good. And Mr. Missel, I also wanted to ask you too about the MST coordinators on the VHA side. I have heard many stories from MST coordinators at various medical centers across the country, and they all consistently say they just do not have enough administrative time. The only requirement is 20% at this point. You also say that in your report, OIG recommends that VHA leaders determine meaningful guidance for dedicating coordinators' time in various VA medical centers. And you're saying that because it's the VA medical center's budget that determines how much more time, other than 20%, an MST coordinator would have to do his or her work. So you don't quite get to a recommendation of it should be mandated that they have more time, but would you agree that moving forward with a stronger mandate to expand that time would be effective?
I think it depends on each facility. And that's what we found when looking at the coordinator. Some of the coordinators we spoke to said they had adequate time to serve their responsibilities. The problem was we found many others that didn't have adequate time and didn't get the resources they needed. For instance, in one facility, the coordinator had 6,000 patients and was only able to spend about 30% of the coordinator's time on MST issues. And a coordinator's role is really critical because when somebody has MST, they're going to probably need a number of services from VHA. So it's multidisciplinary. So the coordinator really is orchestrating the care that a veteran who has experienced MST, is going to get. And if they don't have enough time, it's a problem. And I'll just add one other thing. In June of 2020, VHA issued an operational memo, which essentially said exactly what you did. Make sure they have enough time to do it. And 2 months later, when we conducted interviews, that's when we heard many of them said, we still don't have enough time despite this operational memo.
And would you say the preponderance of MST coordinators don't have enough time?
The ones we spoke to, the majority said, yes, they didn't have enough time.
Very good. So I think the other thing about MST coordinators, beyond their sort of professional expertise, it's also about programmatic outreach. These are important roles that they have to fulfill. Not to mention that once they encounter an MST survivor, they need to spend as much time with that survivor as the survivor needs. And that might be a long time. And that means others aren't being attended to. So I just overall believe that, we need to really look at this, and medical centers, maybe they just need to be told, you need to look at your caseloads and adjust, that you can't just follow a 20% mandate. You have to really make that adjustment. So I will move on. Ms. Murphy, in response to the Inspector General's report, VA has told my staff that for most incorrectly processed claims, VA errors were procedural and didn't impact the overall outcome of rating decisions. Do you believe that that's true? Do you stand by that statement?
I would mostly agree with that, yes.
So then are you saying that 57% of the denials, MST denials, are accurate?
I'm not.
Well, the OIG report is saying that there are that 57% of VBA's denials for MST support were denied. So I'm just asking, are you saying that is what you believe to be an accurate record? Is 57% denials?
We are saying that we acknowledge IG's findings that there were procedural steps maybe that were missed, procedural errors in a case, but we also look beyond that at the actual outcomes, which is the 16 percentage point increase just since the last IG report on the grant rate as an example.
So I think it's important, to point out, and I'm sure that you know this, that the processes and procedures in place, quality control process and procedures are in place, and particularly are in place to protect the veterans' emotional well-being. And so can you speak to how VBA will ensure that these protocols are followed in the future?
Yes, ma'am. I agree with you that the steps are important also as part of the way to get to the outcome. So I'm not arguing with that. There are some improvements. We've improved training. I think a big piece of this is the first step after the first report. We specialized to certain designated individuals that were trained in all of our 56 regional offices. The work then is routed, the oversight at the regional office to make sure folks are completing the training, second signature reviews are done. That's where we had some gaps. So what we have learned in the past is when we specialize work, it's best to be done in smaller number of places. So now rather than designated folks in all 56 offices, we've skinnied down right now to 5 regional offices, about 116 folks, on the way to 1 SES or regional office director being in charge of all of it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. And I understand Representative Miller-Meeks. Yes, you're back. Thank you so much, Representative Miller-Meeks. And I'm going to recognize you for 6 minutes. It's a few of us also went over our time. Dr. Miller-Meeks, you are still muted.
It's like I have a heavy finger and a lead foot. Thank you, Chairwoman Luria. Ms. Murphy, this question is for you. In the report, there was concern about the coordination between VAH and VBA, and in further coordinating, and how do you plan to further coordinate to provide support for veterans going through the MST claims process?
I think it's an important topic. I'm going to ask my colleague, Ms. Rawls. Her office is heavily involved in working with the VBA outreach coordinators and with our outreach efforts in this part of the department.
Thank you very much for the question. We currently are training quarterly our MST outreach coordinators at every regional office. As Ms. Murphy has mentioned, we've also implemented our outreach training symposiums that will include all of the coordinators and processors, making the distinction between the coordinators being at every regional office and the processors being consolidated to the 5 regional offices and eventually to the 1. And when we're going through that, we are continuing to reach out to VHA and include them in those training symposiums. Now, at the regional level, they are working across and coordinating with each outreach coordinator for every medical center within their catchment area. And so you have these integrated pieces at the local level for the regional offices and medical centers, as well as the national level. So we're continuing to strengthen those and ensure that those individuals are identified and that they have clear instructions and guidance on how to reach out and when to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. McGuire, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would agree with what Ms. Rawls has just stated. We do have an awareness both at the local and at the national level of the importance of integrating services. Most importantly, of course, in the individual case for each veteran seeking either a claim for MST or for medical services related to MST. So I concur with what she said. It's an active area where we want to improve. We know that there is an opportunity for service recovery when things don't go correctly. So the relationship at the field in real time between the MST coordinator on the VHA side and the MST outreach coordinators on the VBA side is critical and of mutual concern to both of us.
Thank you. And Ms. Murphy, can you explain the timeline for the VA to update its decision notices to ensure that they are more sensitive to the experiences of MST survivors? And will you engage stakeholders in the revised language?
I think this is ongoing work. This is also particularly a recommendation and an action item from what was mentioned earlier, the Secretary's work group to engage with VHA and our Veterans Experience Office from human-centered design standpoint to look at those communications and see whether there could be improvements to make them to really reach out in a more compassionate way to our MST survivors.
And do you plan to engage stakeholders?
We can add that to our list if it wasn't already on there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Chairwoman Luria, I yield back my time and thank you to our panelists.
Well, thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. I'll now call on Representative Pappas for 5 minutes. We'll go back to 5 minutes for everyone now that we've finished the chairs and ranking members of both subcommittees.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for recognizing me, and thanks to both subcommittees for organizing this session today. I think this has been terrific. This is obviously a critically important issue because we know that, unfortunately, military sexual assault continues, and it is impacting individuals on a day-to-day basis. It's clear that many veterans need assistance to recover from the resulting physical and psychological trauma, and we know that VA has to do more to help. Now, the Inspector General's testimony, I think, shows a frustratingly bad situation for survivors of sexual assault. This represents an unacceptable disservice to our veterans. So, put simply, VA has incorrectly processed more than half of the denied military sexual trauma claims. And I don't know how any of us can find that acceptable. So, as it has been stated earlier by many of my colleagues, this is unacceptable. We've got to make sure that we are heeding the warnings of the IG and working with VA to make this problem better. I think the questions that have been asked by my colleagues earlier on both sides of the aisle have been important. And I recognize that VA has testified that it's moving quickly to fix the identified problems and implement IG recommendations, but this has got to remain priority until veterans have the confidence that the system is working as it should. So, Mr. Missel, maybe I could turn to you first for a question. I know VBA has pointed out in their written testimony that the OIG findings focused on the importance of a quality process as opposed to only outcomes. And I'm wondering if you could speak to why OIG included a recommendation on the importance of VA conducting special focused quality improvement reviews of denied MST-related claims.
Sure. The process that is engaged in to do these claims is just so critically important. These are very complicated claims. There's a lot of issues that have to be dealt with. There's a lot of information to gather. And so that's why, to make sure they get the process right, that is really going to impact the accuracy. And so whatever special reviews that can be done, they do that for other complex benefit issues. I think would be just very beneficial to do, and can only help not only the accuracy, but ensuring that the process is done as well.
I appreciate that. And I want to turn now to the issue of the MST coordinators, which has been touched on by others here. When I wrote to the IG and requested the review, I was hoping that we would hear that the coordinators have the resources they need to ensure high quality support and care. It's an important role for survivors of MST, and one that requires that the coordinators have the time and support needed to do their jobs effectively. But we know that the IG findings show that 39% of the coordinators involved in the survey reported inadequate resources to fulfill their responsibilities. OIG also found that the coordinators face challenges due to high workload demands, insufficient support staff, and inadequate funding. These are major problems for the coordinators who are trying to provide the best support they can for veterans. So maybe I could turn to the VA and Ms. Murphy, if you'd like to respond. I understand that VA plans to address the problems described by OIG. You've said May of next year. How are you ensuring that the increases in resources, staff time, and the other needs that have been highlighted here are going to make the right impact? And how are you going to follow up with the individual coordinators to ensure that the solutions are sufficient ultimately to meet the needs of veterans?
Thank you, sir. On the VBA, the benefits side, Ms. Rawls spoke earlier to some of the efforts, the coordination that happens between VBA and VHA. As far as VHA and its resourcing, I'll have to turn to my colleague, Dr. McGuire, to speak to that point.
Yes, the question of adequate time for MST coordinators at the facility level is critical. The current recommendation of a minimum of 0.2 of an FTE goes back a number of years, and we know that the increase in MST-related claims and requests for MST-related healthcare have grown considerably. So that 0.2 FTE may be insufficient going forward. And I believe that the OIG report highlights that to some extent. The other issue is that Could
I just ask you, because I only have a limited amount of time here, just on that issue, because that's so important. You said may be inadequate. Do you believe it is inadequate? Because we're talking about only 8 hours for these individuals to be focused on these duties of being an MST coordinator. Is that adequate, or do we need to revise that standard?
As Mr. Missel said, it depends on the particular location and the number of MST-related services that are required there. Also, as Chairwoman Brownlee mentioned before, time is critical. You have to spend time when a case comes to you for to your attention. You can't just say, sorry, time's up. And that's an unpredictable variable in all of this. So we need some way to build in flexibility beyond the 0.2 minimum where it's needed, either for the specific needs of the veteran seeking care or because of the sheer demand, because of the rising incidence of cases over time.
Okay, appreciate that. My time's up, so I will yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I'm next going to call on Mr. Moore for 5 minutes, but I'll also go over the upcoming gavel list as we have 2 subcommittees and some people are in the room and some are virtual. So after Moore, it'll be Lamb, Elsie, Mervan, Ruiz, Frankel, and then General Bergman has requested to go last. So Mr. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for testifying today. I look forward to hearing from you all and to collaborating with the VA and the VSOs to address the issue of sexual trauma in the military. Military sexual trauma poses a great threat to the well-being of our veterans who have already sacrificed so much in service to this nation. And I've heard firsthand of heartbreaking instances. We must all work together to help develop a plan to address this issue. Inspector General, this is a question for you. I know the VA established a Tiger team to review the errors identified in the 2018 report. And y'all may have addressed some of this, but I've been on another committee, so I'm back and forth between this and AG. But I also understand that the VA has created an enterprise-wide governance body to oversee all MST-related services. Has the VA shared the details of this Tiger team and governance body with you? And do you believe that the results will improve the experiences for our veterans?
We have not been given details of either one of those initiatives. Obviously, whatever additional attention can be brought to this issue, you would think it would help. And so we look forward to hearing more about it as we work with VBA in addressing the issues.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Representative Moore. I'll now recognize Representative Lamb for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the witnesses joining us today. I prosecuted a lot of cases like this when I was a judge advocate in the Marine Corps, and what I took away from it was that no 2 victims and the effects on those victims, none of those were the same. They were really different as it played out in each person's life, and the way they remembered what happened, the way it affected their memory, the degree of PTSD that they may have suffered, other manifestations of the trauma in their life. And, that experience for me makes me curious about and concerned about the training that our benefits personnel receive and how to recognize the lasting damage of what happens to someone who is a victim of MST. It's just not a very cookie cutter situation the way that a more traditional physical injury would be. And so I was just hoping that one of our witnesses from VBA could enlighten us a little bit about how you are providing training to the VBA personnel who handle these claims, what successes or failures or shortcomings you're having with it, and whether there's more we can do to try to deepen the understanding of the claims reviewers to try to smooth out this process a little bit.
So this is Ms. Murphy. I'd be happy to answer that. After the 2018 IG report, we put together in my shop some national training for all of our claims, MST claims processors. It was a broad foundational, almost 4-hour training that was mandatory before anyone processed an MST case. Subsequent to that, we have continued to make enhancements, improvements, updates to that. In the last 2 fiscal years, we've also done annual training, refresher training based on trend analysis from that prior fiscal year. We are in the process this week, as we speak, we have embraced more expertise in the platforms that the training is delivered. It's more engaging. We have split up the training to specialize it more to the veteran service representative that does the development, the gathering of information, and the rating, the person that makes the rating decision. So the training has been further specialized. Also, there are testlets that test knowledge along the way, and we are also implementing this time a pass-fail aspect to this testing. So we think that's an important part of the accountability built into this training.
Great, thank you. Within that training, do the raters get any exposure to actual victims of MST, sort of speaking in their own words, talking about how it affected them, or is it more delivered kind of from an expert perspective?
The training I spoke of does include scenarios, I would say, mock cases and scenarios, but that sort of real life experience training is what Ms. Rawls spoke to earlier, and that's been covered in our last 2 national training symposiums for the claims processors and the MST coordinators. So that's where they get perspectives from the actual real people, from VHA and from VBA.
Thank you very much for what you're doing, and I hope as this goes along, if there are tools that we can help provide to make that program even stronger, we would love to do that. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Representative Lamb. I'll next recognize Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes.
Hello, Ms. Murphy. One of my top concerns is that the VBA continues to re-traumatize MST survivors, in part because claims processors are not properly trained to deal with these cases. This must change. You noted in your testimony that due to re-traumatization concerns, VBA has ended the practice of obtaining additional information about MST claims via telephone. With this in mind, can you please describe other specific steps VBA has taken to adapt its claims processing procedures in order to avoid re-traumatization of MST survivors?
It's an important question, and I think what we learned from listening to MST survivors themselves and even our own claims processors and outreach coordinators is that, as was said earlier, this is not a one-size-fits-all process across MST survivors. And the prior guidance that was in our procedures manual called for a phone call to be made to every single individual, even if we had everything necessary in the claims folder already to make a positive decision. So we took a step back, we looked at that, and we shifted position on that and said only if it's absolutely necessary to say there is potential re-traumatization in those phone calls. So only if absolutely necessary to get a piece of evidence or fill a gap will that phone call be made.
Then I also understand that the compensation service overhauled the MST claims processing training in response to the OIG's 2018 report. However, the OIG most recent report found that 80% of MST claims denials the claim was at least partially processed by a non-trained individual. I'm curious, how does VBA disseminate its MST claims processing training? And additionally, what accountability mechanisms are in place in order to ensure that staff completed this requirement?
Yes, sir. I will say that in looking back, part of it has been a record keeping challenge. We actually had over 1,400 claims processors take that training, but it's a matter of record keeping and making sure that all parts of the claim are done by only someone who has had that training. So as I mentioned earlier, we previously, our first step at specialization was to have individuals in all 56 regional offices to do this work. What we have learned is that presents some challenges to routing the work appropriately, making sure that that broad number of individuals is trained on a certain timeline. So we are going back to a model that has worked for us in the past on other things like radiation claims, for example, to centralize, specialize those to a small designated number of regional offices, a smaller group of folks, that it's, then we have more control over making sure that the training is completed at a certain time, that checks are done on those individuals, the second signatures are accomplished and documented. And I think that has been the challenge in many of these. I can't say, I won't say that some of these steps weren't done. We just weren't able to document them.
Why?
Some of it was systems problems. So for example, with the second signature reviews, they were accomplished by putting something on a SharePoint site, emailing a decision around to somebody else to get that second signature done. Those aren't efficient methods for our claims processors. They take time, they can be lost in the shuffle. So that, for example, we have, I think it's by the middle of this fiscal year, we have a scheduled system enhancement to facilitate some of those things. So system enhancements is part of it, improved processes, oversight, accountability, all important steps.
Okay. And then finally, could you tell me what percentage of MST claims are handled by individuals who have completed the training requirement?
So as of May 2021, we have centralized down to these 5 regional offices. And in speaking with our Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations, Mr. Clark, he assures me that the training is completed before the work is routed to those individuals.
And just finally, in my past experience, I managed a benefit scenario where case managers worked with clients on benefits. And when you mentioned to me that certain protocols were not followed based on getting second signatures, that is specifically tailored to training and availability and technologies that could correct that. Any way as a member of this committee, we can assist you in that, and the vitality of making sure those corrections are made so things don't fall through the cracks based on human error when it comes to MST is very important. So however we can assist you, I'd like to make sure you know that we're here for you.
Thank you very much.
With that, back.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. I now recognize Dr. Ruiz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. As an emergency physician, I know the barriers that survivors of sexual assault often face to getting the help and support that they need. We are having this hearing today because the VA has long been one of the barriers for veteran survivors of sexual assault. We have heard in testimony today that survivors seeking care for a sexual trauma experience a VA process that is invasive and complex, with wait times for care lasting months or even years. This is simply unacceptable. The VA needs to ensure veterans suffering from sexual trauma work with specialized individuals, that they understand the process and receive the care they need in a timely manner. So during this hearing, we need to determine what the VA needs to get done and to take action. My first question, Mrs. Murphy, in the statement submitted for the record by the Paralyzed Veterans for America, They stated the need for specialized staff training to understand the impact of military sexual trauma on veterans with significant disabilities. What, if any, specialized training do you provide to your employees on the unique needs and experiences of veterans with significant disabilities who have experienced military sexual trauma?
The training is key, and we have these broad foundational trainings, the 4-hour foundational training that we expanded a couple of years ago that we have just updated. It includes what I would say compassion training. That we've also just recently updated it to acknowledge online, like cyber harassment as part of personal trauma. And then as far as the national training symposiums, I think that's really when we are able to include real stories and experiences from actual MST survivors and the unique perspective from VHA. That's what really helps to round it out from a human perspective. Primarily in our procedures manual and in some of our training, it tends to be more of a step-by-step in the claims process. So this broader rounding out with the outreach and the coordinators from VHA, I think it really helps to bring it to the what we've said for many years. These claims folders represent real people, real lives, real struggles, and this helps. This sort of training and outreach.
So who receives this training?
This training is for the actual claims processors that handle the claims, the actual veteran service representatives and rating veteran service representatives, and also the VBA outreach coordinators.
And how about the healthcare personnel? Do they receive these trainings on how to be sensitive and aware of the experiences of those who have experienced military sexual trauma?
Yes, sir, they do. One more category that I forgot to mention is we have phone agents at our contact center, and they have this training as well.
And how often do they receive this training?
As far so the claims.
Is it just a one-time training and then you're done with it, or are they required to conduct this 4-hour training module once a year?
So the foundational expanded 4-hour training is the initial training, and then there is annual refresher training. And then on top of that, we've had our annual symposiums.
And are those annual symposiums mandatory, or are those by those who want to attend those symposiums?
I would have to ask Ms. Rawls to comment on that. She's actually the host and driver of those symposiums.
So, excellent question. Those trainings are required. The symposiums, we ensure that we do have all of the processors and the coordinators attending, as well as leadership. So we don't want to stop and just have those who are touching the claims. These symposiums are also open to the leadership.
And do you also train them in survivor-centric language training, trauma-informed training, like how to be sensitive in your language and how to speak to this to survivors of military sexual trauma?
Yes, sir. Trauma-informed training is a part of the symposium. We have put that in. In addition, we also train on burnout. And this goes across, as Ms. Murphy said, to our call center agents, as well as those who are out there talking to all of the survivors and to those who are processing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ruiz. And next, I'll recognize General Bergman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As a former military commander with UCMJ authority, when you when you have to prosecute events that end up in long-term MST, it is literally a beginning to end approach that I've taken, as well as those Marines and sailors under my command. Number one, you stop it on the front end. But if it does happen, you deal with it in a direct manner, but especially always err on the side of doing everything you can for the victim. Pure and simple. So, Dr. McGuire, if a veteran who experiences MST does not feel safe at a VA medical facility, perhaps because that facility had high rates of sexual harassment, what mechanisms are in place to inform the veteran of their ability to seek care in the community under the Mission Act's best medical interest criteria?
Specifically with regard to the ability to receive care in the community, that would be a job for the MST coordinator, who presumably would have been identified and connected with the veteran seeking MST-related care. And the MST coordinator's role is complex, but one of the major components of it is to address exactly this type of issue. Is the veteran able to be adequately served in the facility where the MST and the veteran are located or not? And if not—
Okay, well, let me, how many MST survivors were provided care in the community last year, and how does the utilization rate compare to prior years?
I do not know the answer to that. I'll have to take that.
Are you in charge?
I have a specific role within VHA overseeing the MST
Who's in charge?
Support team. In charge of
knowing those numbers. How can we make good change? How can this committee provide you the resources necessary when we don't know outcomes? We don't have numbers. So how would we find that number?
I'll take that as a due out and get that back to you shortly. We have a whole data arm of our National Program Office which can answer that question for you.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one then. I know that the VHA provides counseling, care, and other support related to MST to a broader group of individuals other than the enrolled veteran patients. Those other individuals include active duty service members, current and former members of the National Guard and Reserve, and individuals with other than honorable or admin discharges. Can you give me a clue as to how many of those individuals who are not enrolled veteran patients does VA provide MST-related services to each year, and has the demand for MST-related care among those groups risen at the same rates over the last decade or so as the enrolled patients? How does the VHA, and if you can't give me a number, that's okay, but how does the VHA track those patients so we can, again, to develop the understanding of who's getting care, where they're getting care, and how we can adjust resources to make sure that we continue to make it better and cover everybody?
That's an excellent and very fair question. And I'll start by saying I don't have the exact numbers for you, but I can take that as a due out. With regard to the trends, let me put it that way, the whole effort on VA's side, and VHA in particular, has been to expand access for MST-related care by breaking down barriers to access, allowing groups that might not have been included for eligibility.
I only have 40 seconds left. Yeah. I apologize for it. I mean, we can have a conversation at some future time and we can level of detail, but I want to use my last 30 seconds. Mr. Missel, in your opinion, does VHA and VBA, do they work together as they should to support veterans who have experienced MST or another need? What opportunities do you think exist to strengthen the relationship between these two VA entities on behalf of the veterans they serve?
As I said, MST is an issue that goes across VBA and VHA. There certainly are plenty of opportunities, and it would benefit the veteran if they work together. We haven't seen very close consultation. Today, we're hearing that they're working on that and having joint enterprise, which in theory should really help and be very beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, you're back.
Thank you, General Bergman, and thank all my colleagues for participating in this first panel and your valuable questions. And also thank you to our witnesses. I think the discussion and the questions today shows that this is a really important issue and there's a lot of work to still be done. So appreciate your responses, and we'll look forward to continuing to follow up on this topic. So that will conclude our first panel. We'll give a couple minutes for the panels to swap out at the witness table. And as we do that, I'll just announce the names of the people who'll be joining our next panel. So on our second panel, we'll be having Mr. Shane Learman. He is the Deputy National Legislative Director for the Disabled American Veterans. Ms. Christina Keenan is the Associate Director of the National Legislative Service of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Ms. Tracy Farrell, who's the Vice President of Connection and Wellness of the Wounded Warrior Project, and Ms. Katie Anita Purswell, Director of Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation Division of the American Legion. So I will let our next panel get situated at the table, and I believe that one of those witnesses will also be joining us virtually. So when you are ready, we will start with the next panel. Well, it looks as though our second panel has gotten situated, and I also see Ms. Farrell joining us remotely. So I will kick off this panel by asking Mr. Learman to make a statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Luria and Brownlee, ranking members Nels and Bergman, and members of both subcommittees. DAV is grateful for the opportunity to provide our observations and experience on VA's military sexual trauma programs. VA data from May reveals that about 1 in 3 women and 1 in 50 men report having experienced military sexual trauma. Given this alarming prevalence, we must ensure that VA is putting the best interest of veterans at the heart of VHA services and the VBA MST-related PTSD claims process, which for many survivors is often complex and painful experience. Recent feedback shows that once a referral is made to VHA MST coordinators, veterans are pleased with the immediate contact and discussion of VHA services. Many survivors are embracing telehealth services and its more direct access to healthcare. However, there are challenges. VHA MST coordinators in great demand, which leads to coordinator burnout and a high turnover rate. The high turnover rate and the fact that this is often an ancillary duty rather than a full-time role is often cited as creating a lack of continuity that can impact the effective coordination of services. DAV recommends that VA consider a system for all VHA MST team members that includes an increase of resources, providers, and makes coordinators a full-time position. We are also concerned about the lack of a warm handoff between VHA and VBA coordinators and vice versa. MST survivors should not navigate these programs alone, especially the VBA MST-related PTSD claims process. Madam Chair, since 2010, there have been at least 4 VA OIG reports and 1 GAO report establishing that VBA struggles with the proper adjudication of MST-related PTSD claims. As was noted in the August 2021 VA OIG report, VBA failed to effectively implement previous OIG recommendations designed to improve the processing of MST claims. VBA leaders did not monitor compliance with required procedures for processing claims, leading to continuing deficiencies. In May of this year, VBA announced the centralization of all claims processing for MST-related PTSD claims to 5 specific VA regional offices. In addition, VBA has 2 mandatory training courses on MST-related claims processing, and they are requiring that all adjudicators making decisions be placed on a second signature. In other words, a review by a more experienced adjudicator, and will continue this review until they have individually demonstrated 90% or higher accuracy on 10 cases. While it may be too soon to determine the effectiveness of the centralization and the renewed focus on training and quality, DAV recently polled our national service officers across the country. Roughly 70% responded that they have not seen any improvement or decrease in the quality or the timeliness of MST-related PTSD claims. They also shared comments from several MST survivors, noting that VA examiners often lack empathy and compassion, and veterans feel re-traumatized by these exams. Additionally, survivors feel that VA's development letters are not just advising them of evidence requirements, but are actually telling them that they are lying about their assaults. DAV is gravely concerned over the quality and timeliness of these claims because as of November 8th, over 19,000 MST-related PTSD claims were pending on an average of over 187 days. This is greater than the 125 days pending, which VA considers as backlogged. Madam Chair, for more than 11 years, VBA has incorrectly processed too many of these MST claims. Simply put, VA must do better. DAV believes that HR 5666, the Service Members and Veterans Empowerment and Support Act of 2021, is a great place to start. It provides a much needed compilation of provisions that address many of the longstanding issues in DAV's recommendations. Madam Chair, the claims process for MST survivors should not and must not be so complex and painful. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to any questions you and the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Learman. I will now recognize Ms. Keenan for 5 minutes.
Chair Luria, Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Members Nails and Bergman, and members of the subcommittees, on behalf of the men and women of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to provide our views on VA's military sexual trauma programs. The Department of Defense continues to report increases of sexual assaults year after year. Military sexual trauma, or MST, affects the physical and mental well-being of service members and the veteran community. Health issues like post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, and a host of physical conditions affect an individual's relationships, their employment, and their overall quality of life. It is imperative that the Department of Veterans Affairs provide support for MST survivors and deliver benefits and services with dignity and respect at the forefront. Feedback on MST claims from VFW's VA-accredited representatives from across the country indicates that there are several obstacles that veterans face throughout the claims process. A veteran's account of an MST incident alone is typically insufficient for a VA claim, leaving veterans feeling frustrated that their stories are not believed. VA recognizes that not all sexual trauma incidences are reported in service, and to address this reality have a list of markers or other signs which can indicate that an MST event occurred. These include statements from loved ones, hospital records, changes in behavior, disciplinary action, or substance abuse. In practice, though, claims, for example, for PTSD due to military sexual trauma, despite evidence of markers, and mental health treatment more often than not lead to denials. In comparison, claims for PTSD due to combat trauma are more easily granted, sometimes with only a statement from the veteran. The VFW recognizes that MST claims are complex, but more needs to be done to ensure that they are carefully and accurately processed by personnel with MST training. Veterans represented by the VFW have also given feedback about their mental health compensation and pension exams. From veterans, some veterans report positive experiences. One veteran explained that the examiner was compassionate and understanding, and that it was convenient to attend the exam via video teleconference. However, we've also heard common complaints that the exams are very brief, sometimes only 15 minutes. Some say the examiners did not understand military culture. For example, one veteran reported that the examiner asked, quote, "Well, why didn't you sleep in the girl tent?" unquote. This is a telling sign of a lack of cultural awareness and an accusatory manner of questioning by the examiner. In addition, veterans report the contract examiner states that their mental health conditions were due to childhood trauma and not a result of their military sexual trauma. These issues have added to the emotional stress of veterans and create an overall adversarial environment within the claims process. The accurate processing of VA claims is critical to veterans receiving their disability benefits. The 2018 VA Office of Inspector General report, which detailed how VA incorrectly adjudicated half of the reviewed PTSD claims for MST, is incredibly troubling. What is worse is that the OIG's recommendations were not properly implemented, and when VA reviewed a portion of the previously denied claims, still 57% were not processed correctly, and 80% had not been reviewed by MST trained personnel. This is completely unacceptable. In closing, the VFW implores VA to properly implement all of the OIG's recommendations to avoid a worsening situation and re-traumatization for MST survivors. OIG sample data indicates that VA incorrectly denies far too many MST claims. The VFW urges the VA to review previously denied claims for the purposes of re-adjudication, for the sake of the veterans for whom the process has failed. They have already suffered enough because of their trauma. Chair Luria, Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Members Nails and Bergman, this concludes my statement. I'm prepared to answer any questions you or the subcommittee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keenan. I will now recognize Ms. Farrell for 5 minutes. Ms. Farrell is joining us virtually.
Chairwoman Luria and Brownlee, Ranking Members Nails and Bergman, and members of the subcommittees on Health and Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs. It is my honor to appear before you today and to explore the VA's benefits, care, and services to support survivors of military sexual trauma. As a 22-year Army veteran, Vice President of Connection and Wellness at Wounded Warrior Project, and as a member of the VA's Working Group on Sexual Harassment and Assault Prevention, I share your concern over the impact that sexual trauma has had on our nation's veterans, as well as your commitment to caring for survivors. In my written testimony, you can learn more about how Wounded Warrior Project is supporting MST survivors through our programs, as well as our recommendations for improving the benefits and care they have earned through the VA. Now, however, I'd like to focus my remarks on a few key insights. First, it is clear that we can do more to ensure greater consistency, accuracy, and quality of the Veterans Benefits Administration's claims process. Just a few months ago, VA's Inspector General reported that more than half of denied claims related to MST contain processing errors that may have triggered premature denials. The impacts of these denials is far beyond financial. They can create mistrust in the VA system, exacerbate mental health conditions, or bar MST survivors from the full spectrum of VA care and support. We strongly recommend increased, more consistent training for VBA employees and contracted examiners. We believe effective training combines cultural competency in recognizing markers of MST with compassionate, trauma-informed communication. As VA continues to increase its reliance on third-party contractors for these examinations and work its way out of a significant claims backlog, now is the time to thoroughly review MST training materials and current methods for ongoing communication with claims processors. to ensure all VBA stakeholders are utilizing the most up-to-date policy guidance and trauma-sensitive practices. In addition, Wounded Warrior Project is advocating for integration of more mental health support into the benefits system. When submitting an MST-related disability claim, survivors are required to share the details of their traumatic experiences, often time and time again throughout the process. This, combined with what may be invasive medical exams and evidence gathering, can put some survivors at risk for re-traumatization. VBA should anticipate these challenges and build in processes and resources to support MST survivors during stressful moments, like compensation and pension exams and appeals hearings. We recommend VBA increases collaboration with VHA's mental health services, and when possible, conduct personalized outreach to veterans who submit MST-related claims to ensure survivors are educated and connected to the support resources. Thanks to the work of Congress, MST survivors are already eligible for robust mental health care, regardless of the status of their disability claims. However, more can be done to increase access to care and foster a more inclusive, comfortable environment for veterans coping with sexual trauma. We can start by focusing on where care is delivered. Owing to the nature of their trauma, some MST survivors are reluctant to seek VA medical facilities for fear of harassment or general discomfort in male-dominated, veteran-centric spaces. For women MST survivors, we encourage the expansion of women's health clinics into VA medical centers. Where they are available, these clinics offer more appropriate, safe, and welcoming atmospheres for women veterans. We also recognize telehealth as a valuable alternative. The ability to receive care at home can remove anxieties around VA facilities altogether. We believe that throughout the pandemic, VA proved itself to be a leader in telehealth, and we strongly encourage continued investment in the infrastructure to support its delivery, as well as research to identify the most effective treatment approaches and target populations. Lastly, I'd like to highlight the Warrior Care Network, an intensive outpatient treatment program that Wounded Warrior Project offers in collaboration with our academic medical centers. Warrior Care Network facilitates programming specific to MST survivors, addressing the unique challenges associated with sexual trauma and enabling survivors to make genuine, lasting progress in their mental health journeys. You can read more about the intensive outpatient treatment in my written statement, but for now, let me leave you with this. The true power of Warrior Care Network is its holistic model. We leverage peer connection, family support, complementary alternative therapies, and a robust aftercare to provide a truly integrated, effective approach to MST and related mental health conditions. I look forward to sharing with you the best practices and lessons learned from Warrior Care Network as Congress looks to expand access to care for MST survivors. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to offer Wounded Warrior Project's perspective to this important discussion. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Farrell. I will now recognize Ms. Burswell for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairwoman Loria, Chairwoman Brownlee, Ranking Member Nels, and Ranking Member Bergman, distinguished members of the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs and Health. On behalf of National Commander Paul E. Dillard and our nearly 2 million dues-paying members, thank you for the opportunity to discuss supporting survivors of military sexual trauma. I would like to start by acknowledging that military sexual trauma is something that no service member should ever have to worry about. We are trained and conditioned to trust the people to our left and right. We would take a life for them or gladly lay down ours. These people are our family. So why do we sometimes turn away and victim blame when somebody in our family is sexually assaulted? It happens all the time. Women are asked what they did to encourage the assault, and men are asked why they didn't fight to stop it from happening in the first place. We just lost trust in our family. When we leave service, we look to VA to help care and support for us. We ask VA to be our family. This starts with the claims process. Unfortunately, for those who are trying to file an MST claim, they must first declare that they have PTSD from the event, which in and of itself can cause a veteran to lose trust and turn away. If you didn't know, MST does not have its own disability questionnaire that falls under PTSD as a stressor, not its own rateable condition. Veterans should not have to minimize their experiences by placing it under the subheading stressor on a PTSD DBQ. VA OIG reports there's a systematic problem with a lack of oversight in regards to the processing of military sexual trauma claims. VBA concurs that oversight is an issue in their written statements to the report. We need a solution. One way to accomplish comprehensive oversight in this area is to create a standalone office for MST. This office would have a staff who is expertly trained to VA standards in MST injury and claims. There should also be an MST-specific DBQ. While mental health issues are often diagnosed after sexual assault, there are other diagnoses that fall under MST to include physical injury, pregnancy, and infertility. Instead of assessing the physical injuries separately from PTSD, all secondary medical diagnoses should be considered a part of the overall MST claim. By grouping all comorbidities that occur during MST as one, the veteran is likely to have a more cohesive claim to file and will also likely earn a higher rating rather than if all secondary injuries are rated separately. An office for MST would reduce the number of errors for MST claims by making everyone involved an expert. The focus is now on the claim and the care for someone with this specific trauma. It is no longer seen as something that caused PTSD, but rather its own multifaceted diagnosis, which has complex needs far beyond psychological care. I want to conclude by saying thank you for holding this hearing today. It is so important to the American Legion that our members that something be done to rectify the oversight issues in the VA system that they have in processing claims of MST. Our recommendation to create a standalone office of MST will provide the best results by allowing VBA and VHA staff to focus specifically on MST-related claims and care. I know we've all heard this several times today, but it bears repeating. 1 in 3 military service women and 1 in 50 military service men are sexually assaulted while they're in service. 57% of those claims that were filed were improperly denied. We are overdue for an intervention. I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Percival, and to all of our witnesses in this panel for your statements. And we'll now move into questions. I'll recognize myself first for 5 minutes. I wrote down a couple quotes from some of the statements you made. The first one, veterans are frustrated. Next, an adversarial climate in the claims process. And truly a process that causes veterans to quote unquote lose trust and turn away. And I thought about that and I said to myself, the testimony from the first panel, did what we heard earlier instill additional confidence in the process and at the VA? And, I'd really like to start with a yes/no question. And I'll ask each of our witnesses, did the testimony heard from the first panel from the VA instill additional confidence in this process? Mr. Learman?
I think it's too early to tell.
We're hopeful that improvements will be made, but as of now, we see the situation as very difficult.
Okay, Ms. Percival?
I think that what we heard on the first panel is great, and we hope that all of the things that they say are happening and are going to happen. However, it has been noted even from 2018 to 2021 that recommendations are not always taken into consideration. So I would say no.
Well, thank you. And I know we noted earlier, I think it was Mr. Pappas who brought it up, that there have been 4 of these OIG reports or various entities doing these reports. And we're still talking about some recommendations from the first one. Ms. Farrell?
We're very heartened by the approach and the focus on it, and as well are looking towards what's in the future and does what was talked about today actually come to fruition.
Well, thank you. And for the sake of all of our veterans, I mean, we are hopeful that these additional measures can be implemented. And I'll just finish by saying, and I'll allow the witnesses to comment on this as well. I hope to come into the hearing and hear from the remarks from the VA that we would see clearly that they had a comprehensive, deliberative process that was science and data-driven approach. And I think General Bergman's questions flush that out a little bit. What's some data? How many veterans have received care through the Mission Act in the community? I mean, that kind of data and information and understanding that, I think, is important to understanding the approach. And Mr. Nels talked about a science-driven approach as far as, are we using the most current, up-to-date information, science, mental health research in how we approach this. And, as our witnesses mentioned as well, do the DBQs that we use in order to evaluate this and that veterans are asked to fill out, do they reflect that? And that does this process consider the sensitive nature of these claims? Does it connect all veterans to the services that are available to them as they go through the process? And my answer to that, if I were sitting where you're sitting today, is that I think the VA has the absolute best of intentions. They want to be able to answer all of these things, yes. And I think that's why we're here today, why the VSOs are here today and continue to advocate for these things, because they hear directly from veterans and have recommendations of how to make improvements. So we want the answer to all of these questions to be yes, but I personally would answer the question that there's still work to be done. And in the little bit of time remaining, I'll ask our witnesses to comment as well, and I'll go in reverse order this time, Ms. Phil.
I agree with you, ma'am, and I do think that there is opportunities, whether it be through the MST coordinators or peer support or just feedback sessions and us collecting our own data and providing that to the VA and your committee of what's moving forward and keeping an eye on the ball. This can't just be an annual thing. This should be more frequent of checking in.
Thank you. Ms. Percival.
I would like to answer your question by actually going to something I wrote in my written statement in the opening, where I said, the American Legion knows that VA is a system that understands veteran issues and is trained to take care of our veterans' unique needs. I truly believe that. I receive all of my care at VA. When I did my PTSD CNP exam, it was with someone in the community. Sexual assault was something that was brought up within that, but that person that was in the community was totally void of emotion or empathy for what was happening. There just needs to be clear oversight, clear training. Everybody gets the same thing. It all needs to be coming from the same place. One head office that will provide all of the things that need to get done, including keeping records of who's received training and how often.
Well, thank you. And also thank you for sharing your personal insight with the VA. Ms. Keenan?
We just want to reiterate the importance of training. I just really can't stress enough that raters need to be trained on MST, that examiners need to be trained on MST and cultural competency. Better oversight, better governance, and feedback from veterans can all collectively improve this process. And we're hopeful that things will improve.
Well, thank you, Mr. Learman.
Thank you. We really want VA to get good at this. Absolutely. We want them to improve the programs. For over 20 some odd years, I've been personally representing veterans in this process for DAV. And unfortunately, time and time again, we're seeing denials based on improper process and procedures, where the veteran then has to go to the Board of Veterans Appeals and sometimes spend years to eventually get their case granted. So while we are hopeful, the realist in me says, prove it. It's been 20 some odd years. I need to see it done, and our veterans need a better process now.
Well, thank you all. And I will now recognize Ranking Member Nels for 6 minutes because I went over again. I thought it was really important to hear from all 4 witnesses.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. You're doing a wonderful job. I would like to make a few comments before I actually ask a few questions. I look at the 4 members of this panel, all 4 of them, veterans serving in places throughout the world. I think Ms. Keenan, you served in Tuzla, Bosnia. You were with the National Guard. I was in Tuzla in 2000. I don't know what it was like when you were there, but I'd like to thank you for your service. I look at you, Ms. Percival, I guess Sergeant First Class, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. I did a little bit of that as well. Wearing that or that American Legion hat. And I know, Ms. Keenan, you were a post commander in the VFWI as well as post 3903 in Rosenberg, Texas. Of course, you got the good old Marine sitting next to you, Shane. Thank you for your service as well. And then I think about when I look at Ms. Farrell on the Zoom, your service, you're probably with the 25th in Schofield Barracks, but thank you for your service to our great country as well. And what we have here is we have just wonderful Americans. We have people here that are concerned about veterans issues, and they go out there and they demonstrate it each and every day. We have great members on this panel, this committee, that I know they're going to be asking you questions, but I have two. Questions. Ms. Purswell, please expand on the inequities that exist between the way VA handles male and female MST-related claims.
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. The inequities between men and women when they go to the VA to file a military sexual trauma claim falls back to what I said in my opening statement, where men are most often asked why they didn't stop it from happening in the first place. To answer your question, I'm actually going to talk about a service member male service member that was sexually assaulted that I spoke with before this hearing today. He filed his MST claim with VA after he had tried to report his MST while he was in service. While he was in service, he was not believed. He went to court, was denied, went back to court a couple years later when more sexual assaults had happened from the same individual, and was finally granted that the assaulter was put into prison. When he got to VA, he had to go through all of this again and prove all of this again in order to get his MST claim filed. I don't believe that a woman would have to do that. If a woman was sexually assaulted, had reported it, had gone through all of the processes to go to court and everything, that claim would have been approved. For men, it is much more difficult. And a lot of the comments that I heard about this case specifically was that you're a man. If you were a real man, if you were a real hero, you would have stopped it from happening in the first place.
So, thank you. So what suggestions do you have for improving the experience of male veterans who seek that MST-related benefits from the VA?
I think we're already moving in the right direction. I think that VA is doing a good job of trying to keep everything equal when veterans get to file claims. But I think it's really going to, again, come down to having that oversight from the top, the training from the top, and making sure that everybody is trained exactly the same way, has exactly the same compassionate training, empathy training, and medical training for physical injuries. And gender is just taken out of the equation. It shouldn't matter at all if it's a man or a woman.
Thank you. And my last question, Mr. Lehrman, how can VA improve veteran satisfaction with both VHA and contract disability exams related to MST?
Thank you very much. I think a lot of it comes down to compassion and empathy as far as these examiners go in providing that in context to make sure that they understand what the veteran is telling them. To have a mental health provider tell you that your sexual assault didn't matter, to have examiner to tell you you're overreacting and you should just move on with yourself, is difficult for anybody who has to go through the process. More training, more oversight, and just making sure they understand from the veteran's point of view. Empathy, sometimes we forget about while we're doing a CMP exam and checking a box that we're required to by VBA. I think there needs to be the reminder of this is another person who has experienced significant trauma. They understand you're not going to treat them, but at least treat them with kindness.
I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you for your service and your commitment to veterans. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Well, thank you. I'll now recognize Chairwoman Brownlee for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize. I'm in another hearing and we had 6 recorded votes, so I had to leave for a minute, but I'm glad to be back. And before I ask this panel a question, I wanted to make a point that I wanted to make with the first panel, but I see that they're in the audience, so I'll make it now. And this is really in the spirit of better coordination between VHA and VBA. One is VHA, I think, needs to, we need to implore VHA to ensure complete medical records when, if an MST survivor, comes to a vet center or comes to a medical center and says, I've suffered MST and I need help. From that point on, good records should be kept, because if they do need to go through the benefits claims, this issue around it's hard to detect what the stressor is and so forth and so on, I think having the more complete records will help in that process on the VBA side. So I just wanted to make that point. And then in terms of, just better communication too, I think there needs to be better communication between vet centers and medical centers and CBOCs, because, people are kind of coming and going in both ways. And many times there's not a follow-up, to say, this veteran is coming to the medical center, or a veteran at the medical center is saying, I'm coming to the vet center, this is the situation. So that warm handoff continues to exist. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. And in terms of the panel, one thing I wanted to ask with regard on the VA side is, when new patients are requested or referred for mental health services, they have to receive an initial evaluation within 24 hours to identify the care that they need, and a treatment planning evaluation within 30 days. And I was just wondering if any of you can respond. Do you think that's going smoothly, or do you hear from your veterans that that's not necessarily the case, or maybe they don't even know that that's a requirement? Anybody can respond.
I can say that for our members, there's definitely a lag in saying that they need help and being able to get the help and file the claim. For me, my claim was done while I was still in service. I was med boarded, but I did not then receive services until 8 months after I was out of service. So that is a systemic problem. I think just the transfer from DOD to VA, but also having heard people within our membership that have those same problems. They call us, I get emails daily from women veterans that say, I need mental health care. I can't get mental health care. I need to try to file this claim. Nobody's helping me. So there's a big issue there. I was not aware that there needed to be care within 30 days. Or a phone call or a follow-up. That is definitely not the experience that I've had or that I've heard.
Thank you. And Ms. Purcell, you, I think in your written testimony, I apologize that I didn't hear your testimony today, but in your written testimony, you talk about, wanting to see the VA create a sort of a standalone office for handling MST and kind of get rid of these silos and the separate administrations. I think this is a really good suggestion, and I think that's the direction that the VA should go in. But can you say a little bit more about that?
So I feel like they're already starting to move towards that by going from the 5 regional offices to the 1 regional office. So that is great to hear that's happening, but it needs to be more than just the regional offices that are doing the oversight of the claims that are already being filed. I wrote down a note while you were talking that they need to be making sure that it's the right person asking the questions and that are doing the reports, the right people in VA. Not everybody is suited to do that type of work. When you have an office where this is your job is to handle military sexual trauma claims, care coordination, peer support, and any of those categories, then you are specifically trained, you are fit for that position, and there should be proven results that come out of that. When you have it centralized into one place and you have one overarching office that is looking at all of those things and monitoring all of those things, it's going to cut down on the problems that are happening when everything is spread apart at 56 different regional offices, or 5 now.
Great. And lastly, I just wanted to ask really all of you, going back to the CMP exams and I apologize if people have already asked the question, but in the past, there's been an expression that the contractors rush through the CMP exam, and that causes a problem, particularly talking about their evaluation with regards to MST. And I've heard others say in their testimony that it's not so bad anymore. So I just kind of wanted to get a sense from all of you about, do you feel like these contractors are fully trained, up to speed, and are doing veterans right by their examinations?
Yes, DAV believes that they've actually gotten better. There's been more training. And I don't necessarily believe, or DAV believes, that it's a contract examiner issue. I think it's an examiner issue. Our experience in looking at thousands of examinations, whether it's VHA or contractors, have told us that it really depends on the examiner, not specifically where it's being done. So as long as we're providing quality training and oversight on examiners themselves, I think is the key, more versus contract and VHA.
Great. Ms. Keenan?
So I'll just add, we do have feedback from veterans saying that sometimes their exams are rushed, and only 15 minutes for a mental health exam is probably not sufficient for the process of the claim. Comments about why didn't you sleep in the girl tent? Why were you sleeping in the girl tent? Just show a lack of cultural competency. So training is really key, not only on MST and the various markers, but also on military cultural competency. And also we suggest that, veterans have the opportunity to provide feedback after their exams for quality assurance purposes, so that we can see better if there are gaps in the training or if there are issues with particular examiners.
I think my time is up. So I thank you and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ms. Brownlee. I'll now recognize General Bergman for 6 minutes.
Thank you. We'll get the most out of this 6 minutes. To kind of piggyback onto what Chairwoman Brownlee comment on CNP exams. So if we have a backlog, we have a lack of standardization of training, and then therefore lack of service provided or quality of service provided, because it's not about quantity, it's about quality. Would any of you like to make a comment on the following statement, is that now is the time for VA to not only consider, but actually add a contractor or two that is capably trained, focused, as you suggest, sir, and to address the issue now with surge resources, as we would say in the military, and then when we've gotten the, if you will, backlog and the standardization to where we want it to serve the veterans, would that make sense for the VA to do?
Absolutely, and that's a great point. We think that would make sense, but we also think adding maybe more VHA examiners for the CMP process right now too is important, because there's 50,000 pending backlogged CMP examinations across the board. So finding a way to reduce that, whether it's more contractors, more VHA personnel, you're right, it is now. COVID-19 caused a lot of the backlogs that we're currently experiencing. So if we don't find a way out from under it now, it's just going to continue to get worse.
Any other comments from any other panelists?
I'll just add that, veterans understand that there is a backlog to claims and that the process is taking longer, primarily because of the effects of the pandemic. The primary objective should be accurately processing these claims, even if they do take a little bit longer to get through the backlog. That timeliness needs to be prioritized versus getting through the backlog quickly, and forcing veterans to maybe be experiencing denials and then having going to the appeals process.
Yes, so I do think that would be a good idea to have two people that are outside contractors coming in to look at those issues. in my research within this issue, I noted that the American Psychological Association has different ways that they handle patients with MST. Not every veteran goes to VA and files a claim for MST or goes through that process, but there are still forms that are filled out for patients that are saying that they had military sexual trauma related issues that they needed to deal with. So maybe even looking and seeing how they handle those cases and what they're doing and what works for them might also then work for VA. But I also agree with these wonderful people here on the panel with me that it really comes down to training, oversight, and making sure that we're doing it right in the first place and not trying to rush through.
Ms. Farrell?
Not to be duplicative in any nature, but definitely agree as well, strongly agree. And on keeping the thought of cultural competencies, subject matter expertise, and training in mind, and looking at what, as was previously said, the DoD consulted with RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, when they were looking at their sexual assault response program. And I think there is also an opportunity there to incorporate some other types of training or cultural competency or subject matter expertise external to the VA.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I guess we all agree on the time is now. The question is how. We know the why. And if we, the we in this case is the VA, have the standards, have the criteria set for adding additional surge resources for a period of time, I think what I heard you say, and let's take advantage of that. Let's not focus as bureaucracies, well-intended as they might be, well, let's add some more bureaucratic efforts to achieve this goal. That could be a long time before we, so again, to prioritize, as the VA must, the quickest way, and without sacrificing quality, I believe, is to add another contractor or two, get the backlog under control, get a sense of urgency to that. And for that veteran who has suffered MST, they know that there is a prioritized bureaucratic reaction to their needs. And I don't see as how the VA, we could ask the VA to grow its ranks, because now you add FTEs and you may not need that many in the long term. So get the people you have trained to provide the services, get them at the level that's going to benefit the veteran. And with that, I'll yield back 15 seconds.
Thank you, General Bergman. I'll now recognize Mr. Moran for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank all the veteran service organizations for testifying and continuing to advocate for the MST survivors. Several of you have commented the need to avoid re-traumatization on MST survivors as they navigate through the fraud claims process. Last month, I was pleased to appear before the DAMA subcommittee regarding my discussion draft of legislation to ensure that the Board of Veteran Appeals process for adjudicating MST claims in trauma-informed. Among other directives, this legislation would prohibit the board from asking sensitive questions about an MST survivor's experience if this information is contained in the evidentiary record. For any witness who cares to speak, I would greatly appreciate it if you could elaborate on what this reform to DVA's appeal process, that is relying on the evidentiary record, would achieve. And additionally, are there any other reforms specific to the claims appeal process that would reduce the potential for re-traumatization? And finally, has the VBA conducted outreach to your organization and been receptive to your recommendations on these matters?
Thank you. In reference to not re-traumatizing at the Board of Veterans Appeals, while we think that is a great idea, the problem we see in this is right now, based on the criteria for establishing an MST PTSD claim, is corroboration of the stressor. The majority of these that are being denied by the VA regional office are for that reason. So when it gets to the Board of Veterans Appeals and to the law judge, the reason for the denial is that corroboration. So if they're not able to ask those questions to corroborate it, to grant the benefit, it actually may hinder the ability for the judge or the board to make a finding of fact on the case for future appellate matters. While we understand the need to not re-traumatize, it's part of the problem with the current MST process. So, for example, if we went to a model that didn't require verification of the PTSD stressor or the sexual assault event, and we just went to a process as noted in HR 5655, that it's just if they said it happened, that would also eliminate re-traumatizing veterans and MST survivors throughout the entire process.
Thank you.
So we do support the draft legislation, and we appreciate trying to inject some of this trauma-informed language, which we see in other areas. Not re-requesting mental health exams when they already exist, to not put the veteran through that process a second time if it's not necessary, for judges to carefully look at all the evidence within the claim, because some of the evidence actually might all be there, to really just focus on a few different questions that the veteran may respond to add more evidence to the claim or the appeal. But we definitely see this, the board as an area where some of this sensitivity can be added, and we definitely appreciate some of those efforts.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt our virtual person as well. I agree with what they've said. I feel like when it comes to the Board of Veterans, the board, that having a peer support specialist in this instance would be very beneficial. Somebody who has gone over the information, has been with the veteran, and then can speak on behalf of the veteran so that they don't have to talk about it again. Sometimes it's just saying it out loud again that is what is re-traumatizing. So if you could have somebody say those words for you and provide that explanation for you, can also be helpful in the situations.
Thank you.
Wounded Warrior Project also supports this legislation. And I think it's important to note that it's not just the re-traumatization, as it is an invalidation of an experience when something is denied. And so having the appeals process is important, but having the ability to have full records before it even goes into a claim process and review them, and then creating an opportunity where either someone speaks on your behalf or it is spoken in a very cognizant and culturally sensitive mode is really important as well.
Thank you all very much. And with that, I yield back my time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Movan, and I want to thank everyone for their participation today, both our panels of witnesses as well as my fellow colleagues who were able to join us. This hearing, I think, has provided valuable insight into how we can help improve the VA's MST program and delivery of those benefits that we all agree our veterans have earned and deserve. And we want to make sure that no matter where or how a veteran has survived military sexual trauma, that however they engage with the VA, they receive compassionate care, and the VA is doing everything that they possibly can to provide them that care and access to all of the resources that are available. We've also discussed steps that the VA is taking to improve deficiencies that were addressed in the August 6th OIG report. And these two subcommittees will both remain diligent until we have ensured that the VA has implemented these recommendations. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue, both with our VSOs who so generously offer their time to appear before the committee, as well as work with our veterans day in and day out. And I just want to close by thanking you for the work that you do. And General Bergman, do you have any closing comments?
Only to say thank you to all of you, fellow members of the committee, but also all of you who've taken the time on both panels to provide valuable testimony before us today. A friend of mine one of my dearest friends and squadron mates from Vietnam, I believe has one of the best quotes I've ever heard when it comes to prioritizing. He says, "You think you have time, but you don't. The time is now. It's past time to theorize. It's time to act and to consolidate as necessary and appropriate for positive outcomes for our veterans." Thank you.
Well, thank you, General Bergman. And again, thank you to the members of both committees for coming together to address this important topic. And with that, I will remind all members that they have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, both subcommittees are adjourned. Thank you.